morning, everybody. I'm Fanis Papathanasiou. I'm journalist, diplomatic correspondent with the Greek public television in Athens, and we continue with our next panel. In regard to Turkish, and the topic is, are there any alternatives to EU accession for Turkey and the roadmap after the elections May 14? I'm very glad because we have a great company here with experts that have a deep knowledge of this issue. And I will point out the high level of the participation of this panel and the next panels about Turkey a few days before the Turkish elections that give us a chance to have a better idea of what is happening in Turkey. So next to me is Minister Aggelos Syrigos, Deputy Minister of Education and Religious Affairs. Good morning, Mr. Syrigos. Good morning. And professor and expert in Greece, Turkey, and EU relations. He will give us a good take of what is happening between Greece and Turkey. Professor Soli Özel, a well-known professor at Kadir University in Istanbul. Good morning. Mr. Günter Seufert, head of Center for Applied Turkish Studies in Germany. Good morning. And Mr. Galip, Dalay, Associate Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Program at Chatham House in England. Good morning.
Good morning.
Mr. Syrigos, we'll start with you. Many analysts believe that the upcoming elections in Turkey have the potential to be the most crucial for the last decades, at least since 1950, when we had the last single-party government in Turkey. What is your take as far as the importance of these upcoming elections?
I think that they are the most important since Erdogan came to power some 21 years ago. The most important thing is that during these last 21 years, many things changed in Turkey. Before Erdogan, we were speaking about the deep state, which was a Kemalist deep state. Today, the deep state, the state itself, is an Islamist state. So, if the opposition wins in the elections, they will have to deal with the apparatus which is against them. And it will be a very tough job. It's going to be similar to what Erdogan faced back in 2002, when he came to power, where he had to face the army, the judiciary, the diplomats. Everybody was against him. We'll have a similar situation now, if the opposition wins. On the other side, the opposition is consisted by 6 parties. They have Islamists among them, Davutoglu, for example, the previous Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we have a strong nationalist element by Accession. So there are many things in the opposition which are much closer to the Islamists in comparison with what Erdogan faced in 2002. In 2002, the other side was totally against Islam. Today, the other side has elements of Islam in it, and nationalism.
Professor, give us your take as far as the Turkish society. How the Turkish people feel about the upcoming elections? Do they think that are important as we think in the West?
Well, I do. I don't know about the rest. This may actually may very well be more than just the most important elections in 21 years. I could go along with you that it may be certainly the most important election in my lifetime, and therefore probably the most important election since 1950. And of course, the symbolism of May 14 is that it's on the same day that the CHP one-party rule was ended or terminated by the Democrat Party's victory. My sense is there are several reasons as to why this is a very important election anyway. And one of those is I really don't think the country can tolerate a continuation of this incredible tense polarization. And we've got to find some degree of normalization. That's politically and socially. Economically, our experiment with unorthodox theories, to be gentle about it, has been quite disastrous for all segments of society, save maybe a top 10%. And the urban middle classes are basically eroding just day by day. And this cannot really be continued either, or continuing those is going to impoverish Turkey further. So the goal of making Turkey the China of I don't know where is going to make us the Bangladesh of somewhere. And finally, I mean, in the last panel, the last question was about, Erdogan did this, that, and the other, so will a lot of things change? You see, whether or not you're a Marxist, there is something to be said about dialectics. Mr. Erdogan started out with a desire to create a vengeful and religious youth. It turns out that the majority of the 5 million new voters that are going to vote and have known nothing but him in power are mainly secular nationalists. Therefore, things do not always go the way you really want them to go. And in that sense as well, the AKP has basically failed to understand the society that it helped create as well. And their re-election, if they continue with the same mentality, is going to generate even further tensions between the rulers and society. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Seufert, in Germany there is a large Turkish population. Give us your views as far as the importance of the elections, what the Turkish people in Germany think, what the German government thinks about the elections.
I think compared to the last elections in Turkey and to the referenda that lead to the introduction of the presidential system, we have today a more calm atmosphere in the whole of Europe when it comes to Turkish migrants or migrants with Turkish descent. There is at the moment no big rallies, and there is at the moment no really radical or escalating rhetoric. But I want to say something to what Mr. Özel said. I fully agree that it is an important elections, and I think it's also an important elections for Turkish relations with the West. I think we could be more relaxed on the future of Turkey if we would not be in such a very difficult global position, where Turkey, as the leading country in the region, as the powerhouse of the region, both economically and
military. I think there is a problem with the mic.
The mic, we cannot hear you well.
We cannot hear
you cannot hear me.
Can you talk a little bit closer
Yes.
to the mic? Yeah.
Now it's better?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. No, I think it's also a very important election for Europe and for the Turkish-European relations. We could be more relaxed if we would not be in such a difficult geopolitical position when it comes to the future of Turkey, which is a powerhouse economically and militarily in the region. I also agree, I would like to say, if we would not have this difficult geopolitical situation, one could be a little bit more relaxed, because what we see and what has been said, that Mr. Erdogan did away the deep state or the Kemalist state. And now it is for the first time in Turkish history that Turkish society, which is made up, as we know, of different cultural camps or cultural components, it's for the first time now dealing with itself. Until now, the society was always, particularly the largest group of society, the Muslim conservative, have always dealt with the Kemalist state. Now, for the first time, society is forced or is asked to find common ground. And what we see on the part of the election, of the opposition, that this is for Turkey a very new phase. This creates hope, at least in my opinion, that parties of very different ideological leaning are able to unite on political ground, on political demands. And therefore, I think if we would not have such a difficult geopolitical situation, we could be a little bit more relaxed. But this is unfortunately not the case.
Mr. Dalay, what is at stake at these upcoming elections?
Well, I think at stakes are the future of Turkish democracy, the future of Turkish political or domestic political order, the future of Turkish political system, whether it's going to remain a presidential system or a parliamentary one, the future of Turkey's position in international affairs, more particularly on the great power competition between West, Russia, and China, and the future of Turkish economy, whether we will continue with this unorthodox but the destructive economic model, or whether we are going to return back to a more orthodox or more normal economic system, but also how Turkey is going to position itself in the shared neighborhood with Europe, because I think almost all of them will be affected in one way or another from these elections. Maybe in some areas it will be less, the factor of change will be less pronounced than others, but I think particularly for domestic political order of Turkey, that's a fundamental elections, because if the current government wins, that means more or less that Turkey will continue with the current political pictures, further personalization of power, further deinstitutionalization of the state, further authoritarianization, and also with the current ultra powerful executive presidency of the Turkish style. If the opposition wins, not everything will change, but at least this personalization of power elements will be less salient, because and we will see more institutionalization of the power. The institution will matter itself, the state structure will matter itself, so that's quite fundamental also when it comes to Turkish foreign policy making. The foreign policy making ecosystem in Turkey will change, because recently the foreign policy has also become increasingly personalized, and in the case of an opposition win, probably the weight of the foreign ministry will increase in Turkish foreign policy making process, and that will be reflected through the discourse of Turkish foreign policy, through the means and mechanism of Turkish foreign policy, and through also probably the policies of Turkey as well.
Professor Syrigos, Minister Christofoidis recently, a few days ago here in a related panel, said that about the EU-Turkish relations, that it looks like an unhappy marriage with no incentives of both sides. Do you think it is an unhappy marriage? And what will be the incentives to be a happy marriage?
Okay, for the time being, there is no marriage.
It seems like there is a relation, but...
It is this interesting relationship between Turks and Europe. Turkey is part of the European history, but many people in Europe, in the rest of Europe, do not want to think about it. Let us take the example of Erdogan. When Erdogan came to power, he wanted to follow a European path because that path was giving him more freedom and the power to be in Turkish politics. During the last 10 years, Erdogan changed totally this policy, and now he considers that Turkey is a power almost equal to France, Germany, and he does not have to follow the West. He has to follow his own policy. I think it is very difficult to say if Erdogan is re-elected that we can continue this path. Whereas if Kılıçdaroğlu is elected, then the situation will be totally different.
In what ways?
The European Union will come and everybody will be extremely happy to have a new person in government, and they will offer him what Erdogan was losing all these years. They will offer him opening of chapters for EU accession because they want to take him back, they want to take Turkey back. So if Erdogan remains in power, there is no marriage. We shall continue this strange relationship. if Kılıçdaroğlu comes to power, then we shall continue to see if there is a marriage in the future or not.
Okay. Professor Özel, do you agree? What led to the current shape of the Turkish-EU relation?
What?
What led? What is the reason behind this deterioration, the today's shape of Turkish-EU relation?
Well, what about if we start with Mrs. Merkel basically saying Turkey should not be a member, and then Mr. Sarkozy basically insulting the Turkish Republic in the person of this president? That doesn't mean Turkey itself did not drop the ball. But if we're going to be honest about history, we should really look at the years 2005, 2006, when even before the ink was dry on the agreement to start negotiations, very important members of the European Union were trying to find ways of getting out of it. And that is not something that populations do not sense. And then it served Mr. Erdogan's purposes, if you will, to go along with that, particularly after the 2008 financial problem. Now, the thing is, I thought the accession process is a process, not a charity act. So to talk about if Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu is elected, then the EU is going to be very generous and suddenly start opening chapters, to me it sounds very unserious. I mean, we in Turkey, I think, or at least some of us in Turkey, have tried to be as honest as possible to take a compte rendu of what had happened, particularly since 2005. I am not at all sure, based on my conversations with colleagues and others in European Union member countries, that the EU collectively or individual members singularly have actually done the same thing. Unless you do, it will still be very difficult to actually ameliorate relations. There is no doubt that if Kılıçdaroğlu comes to power, we will have a different level of engagement. Institutions are going to be back. There will be a lot less whims. And of course, the language of diplomacy is going to change for the better, undoubtedly. But there are fundamental problems. And one of those if one of those problems was Mr. Erdogan's unwillingness to actually go along that path any longer, the other one was the unwillingness of the European Union to actually seriously think about its relations with Turkey, with or without membership prospects. So what I would suggest, if indeed we manage to change our government, is for the European Union to actually reassess what it had done and then try to find ways of communicating with Turkey in a much more broad way and in a much more open-minded fashion.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Seufert, what do you think? What is the reason behind this situation today?
I would agree with what Mr. Özel has said. I think the European Union did not manage to create incentives for the continuation of the membership process, particularly in the moment when in Turkey itself the democratic process was declining or was stopped. And it was, I think, for some of our leaders, it was a kind of relief that Turkey stopped its democratization process. Soli said, this regarding membership or not membership, I think this is a crucial question. We know it's a crucial question. I think we know that the opposition leader, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu, now talks about renegotiations of restart of the negotiations of the European Union. And I think here, honestly, the European Union should send very clear messages, because I think membership, unfortunately, is not longer in the cards. When we see how much difficulty the European Union has to integrate the tiny Western Balkan states and how reluctant it is, for example, to invest more in the Western Balkan states, economically, but also politically, then we see that the EU is not in the capacity today to talk about Turkish membership. But this does not mean that the European Union, with a win of Kılıçdaroğlu, would not be ready to deepen the economic integration. We know that then there would be a new moment in the customs union, but this is a very long process. But there are other areas of cooperation. We know we have a huge paradigm shift when it comes to the global economy. We're talking about the decoupling of the world economy. We're talking about economic blocks, geopolitical concerns and considerations. And we know that there is a remake in the supply chains, and we know that Turkey as an industrial hub is very well positioned. And therefore, if there is a new political climate between the EU and Turkey, I think this could really be very productive. Economically, it could be very productive in terms of energy policy when it comes to renewables. It could be also a way forward in a very uncharted and not really charted waters, cooperation in the defense industry sector, where Turkey is thriving and where Europe is now willing, particularly Germany, willing to spend more, forced to spend more. And there is naturally, what I said, the overall political situation that has led to the fact that for the first time after the Cold War, Europe is rethinking enlargement and neighborhood policy in security matters, in security contexts. And this is the reason why we talk about Ukraine, Moldavia, and Georgia. And these are naturally states that whose society and whose leadership has in a way perceived the war in Ukraine as a direct threat to not only to their territory, but also to their political system. We see that Turkey is in a different position. It is the military strength of Turkey that makes it understandable that Turkey does not feel the war as a risk to its territorial integrity, and it is the authoritarian style of its leader that also prevents that the Turkish society is feeling this global conflict as a threat to its democratic system. And therefore, I think membership is not in the cards, not from the part of capacity and not from the part of security cooperation, but the European Union would be more than willing to cooperate with Turkey on a variety of issues.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Dalay, do you think Turkey wants to become a real member of the European Union?
Well, I think whether you ask about the society or the state or the elites, for the society, we can only rely on the polls. At least 65 to 70, 75% of the Turkish population wants an idea of Turkish membership in Europe. Maybe they do know that this will not happen, but what this signifies in itself is important for them. So therefore, the journey is as important for many as the final destination itself. But unfortunately, right now, you cannot have a journey if you don't have a prospect of final destination. And that's precisely what has happened in Turkish-European context. As Soli Özel and Günter has rightly said, the prospect of Turkish EU membership was killed not when Turkey was authoritarian, but when probably Turkey was the most reformist in its history. I mean, one reform package after another was passed between 2002 to 2007, and that's precisely when the two most important members of the EU, the Germany and France, told Turkey, no matter what you do, the membership is not in the cards. So, and then the authoritarianism only justified this position, but this position was taken before Turkey went into this full-fledged authoritarian trajectory. I think for some European quarter, probably a democratic Turkey is preferable. But I think for quite many quarters in Europe, maybe an authoritarian Turkey is preferable, because the EU is quite know what to do with authoritarian states. It has many in the neighborhood, it deals with them, it's quite transactional, it involves give and takes. So for some quarters in Europe, it seems that, you know, a Turkey, kind of an Egypt bordering Europe, is not a bad option, rather than a democratic Turkey, which is part of the Europe. Because I think for many, how to handle a democratic Turkey is much more troublesome than how to handle an authoritarian Turkey, because it's relatively easy to do. And that brings us to the question of, you know, the main question of the session, whether there can be an alternative to the accession framework. Right now, unfortunately, neither side is willing to have an alternative to accession framework, even though neither side believes in the accession frameworks. But I think it's crucial if not an alternative, we need a parallel framework to make Turkish-European relationship once again a bit more meaningful with more content. And that also means we need a new agenda. I think some element of this new agenda is being informed by what is happening at the global level. The global restructuring or the systemic rivalry that we see at the global level has to shape the new nature and the future of Turkish-European relationship. In the end, when you look at Turkey, actually, Turkish-Western relationship or Turkish-European relationship historically was more informed by what was happening at the global level or global processes done by bureaucrats in Ankara or EU. I mean, if you look at 1856, when Turkey became part of the Paris Agreement, it was the result of the Crimean War, which basically posed a significant question for European security. And the Ottoman Empire back then, it was the Russian threat, it was the Ottoman elite's quest for geopolitical identity, status in international affairs. I think more or less exactly the same feature also informed Turkey's NATO membership in 1952. Against it was the Soviet threat, against it was the Turkish elite's quest for security and geopolitical identity for Turkey, etc. I think the Ukraine war is such a watershed moment. It will define the future of Turkish-EU relationship or Turkish-Western relationship much more than what's, the accession talks will tell us. And therefore, I think a foreign policy dialogue is crucial in the next chapter of Turkish-European relationship because the European neighborhood is being restructured, the Turkish neighborhood is being restructured, and there whether the EU and Turkey will be each other's competitor or whether they will cooperate with each other is a fundamental question. I mean, just look at Libya. Where does Europe stand? Where does Turkey stand? Where does France stand? Where does Italy stand? So for EU to become an actor in its neighborhood, it's crucial to have a foreign policy dialogue with Turkey that is more meaningful. And finally, if you look at the recent NATO, the NATO on the one hand is becoming more European, on the other hand is becoming more global. In terms of membership composition, it becomes more European with the new members, but in terms of its global aspirations, it becomes more global with Chinese threat being also at the center of the new concept paper. And this necessitates a much more serious discussion between Turkey and Europe when it comes to European security, which currently is lacking. And not only with Turkey, I think there is a necessity for a serious dialogue on the European security with countries that are member of NATO but not member of EU.
Professor Syrigos, the Greek-Turkish relations is an important chapter of the Turkish-EU relations. What is the prospects after the elections for the Greek-Turkish elections? Of course, to a large extent, this depends on the outcome of the result. But let's say if Erdogan wins. Erdogan has said that wants to revise, to change the chapters of the Lausanne Treaty. What do you think?
Well, since the disastrous Turkish earthquake in February, there is calmness in Greek-Turkish relations. For example, the best example has to do with violations of Greek national airspace. There were a few until the 14th of March, and since then there are no violations of Greek national airspace. Nevertheless, this is tactical. The strategic positions of the two countries have not changed at all. For example, there are 3 letters that were sent by the representative of Turkey in the United Nations, which expressly question Greek sovereignty over islands in the Aegean Sea which are explicitly mentioned in the Lausanne Treaty or the Paris Treaty of 1947, which gave Greece the Dodecanese group of islands. This is on the table. The question is whether Turkey, and the big gap between Greece and Turkey is that Greece considers that there is only one issue on the table, the delimitation of the EEZ and the continental shelf, whereas Turkey considers that on the table we have the issue of the demilitarization of the Eastern Aegean Islands, the extent of the Greek territorial waters, the limits of the flight information region and the search and rescue region, the difference between the 6 and the 10 miles, 6 miles territorial waters and 10 miles national airspace, 5 issues until now. The issue of the grey zones of sovereignty as they came out in 1996, and the last issue of, the MOU, the MOU that has been signed between Turkey and Libya for the Eastern Mediterranean, and the last issue that has been raised, the sovereignty, Greek sovereignty, questioning of Greek sovereignty of the Eastern Aegean Islands. So we have 8 issues. 1 issue from the Greek side and 8 issues from the Turkish side. There is a large gap between the two sides. I do not believe that all these issues can be solved one day, but I strongly believe that we can sleep upon them. We don't have necessarily to solve them. But let me take the example of demilitarization. It is obvious that Greece does not threaten the Turkish coasts. It is an issue that can be solved, whereas there are issues that are out of question. For example, the issue of Greek sovereignty over the Eastern Aegean Islands. So the question, if Erdogan is in power, because if the opposition is in power, the situation is going to be totally different. If Erdogan remains in power, then the question is whether he will raise some of these issues. If any of these issues is raised, then the situation, apart from the delimitation of the EZ and the continental shelf, then we shall have a problem.
Professor Özel, what do you think is the prospects the day after for Athens and Ankara? And do you think Erdogan has said that he will challenge, 100 years after the Lausanne Treaty, will challenge some of the chapters? Do you think the opposition will challenge as well?
He hasn't recently said it.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
A while.
Therefore, maybe you can...
Last time was when he was in Athens in December 2017.
But that's already 6 years ago. Long gone.
He forgot it.
No, it's long gone. Look, honestly, we can debate endlessly the details of Turkish-Greek conflicts, reasons, who is more sensible, who is less sensible, who is really beyond bounds, and all those things. Greece pursues its national interests. It has every right to do so, and it does so sometimes probably violating certain rules itself. To nitpick on those things will not get us anywhere. I have spent now a good deal of my life, a good part of my life, as a member of the Turkish-Greek Forum, and we have worked a lot on the Aegean issues, and at that time the sovereignty thing was not really on the agenda. I really don't think there is really all that much on the Aegean that cannot be solved if the two sides had the political will to finally settle those damn things. How many exploratory talks did we have? 66 rounds? 66 or 60? Okay. Now, if there was a political will, we would not have 65 rounds that can go on endlessly. This is really, at the end of the day, a political judgment, a political decision that the two sides will have to make. But we have gone through an interesting period when the Turkey-EU relations dropped from our agenda and from the EU's agenda, membership that is. Turkey tried, because of the Arab revolts and the kind of glorious perspectives that inspired in our rulers, we've gone for about 10 years in seeking to become a hegemonic power in the Middle East. I think that project has failed, and I have to say the Greek side, the Greek governments, successive Greek governments took advantage of that void that Turkey has left. That is why we have all those problems in Eastern Mediterranean. We are now in a post-Ukraine war situation. The context, in my judgment, has drastically changed, and we will see whether or not just Europe, but also Greece can actually get itself to have a different approach, just as Turkey needs to have a different approach. And one formula I have recently come up with is the following. For a while now, after the Arab revolts and because of Turkey's own policies, it was very convenient for the European side and all countries to treat Turkey as a Middle Eastern country. I would suggest that, especially on security things that Günter mentioned and Galip did as well, we need to have a dialogue. You cannot have the Black Sea emerging as an important strategic theater, the Eastern Mediterranean emerging as a strategic theater, and basically not include in your conversation the country that controls the passage from one to the other, and its landmass actually sits between those two seas. So it would be better for the Europeans to start thinking about Turkey as a European country, which is also a member of NATO, by the way, that actually has borders with the Middle East that is going through an incredible transformation in a very perilous demographic and political condition. That's what I would suggest. And in a way, I cannot speak for them, but even if Erdogan were to be re-elected, I think Turkish foreign policy will have to be rethought.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Seufert, we have a few minutes. What is a real incentive that could lead to new relations, to new era for relations between Turkey and the European Union in the next couple of years?
I think a good start would be really if the European Union would go on with visa liberalization. The leader of the opposition has pledged to fulfill the last 7 criteria, and there will be resistance in the European Union, but I think this would be a good start, and this would be really a good message to the Turkish populace. Because I don't really agree with Galip when he said that 85% or so, 58% of the EU membership, the population votes for EU membership. The number, Galip, the number might be true, but for me, when I look at the longer run of the development, the question, would you like to be a member of the European Union, indicates more the state of confidence with the own situation in Turkey than really a longing for Europe. When AKP democratized in the first 10 years of the AKP, the quest for membership was actually lower than it is today. But this is only a side note. I fully agree with what Soli said. I also think that disregarding who is going to win the elections, this assertive foreign policy will come to an end because it is not, the bases are no longer there. The thinking that Turkey is able to unite and lead the Muslim Middle East is no longer there. The trust in the economic strength is no longer there. And with the catastrophe of the earthquake, the trust in the state capacity is also shattered. And therefore, I think this will come to an end.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Dalay, finally, do you think the European Union can be a forum so Turkey's West, with the relation with the West, could be in the new path after the elections?
Like whether we will see a better relation between Turkey and the West after the election? Well, it depends, probably which sides will win. But I think in any case, probably some of the crises will be better managed, even if it's not resolved. The fundamental issues in Turkish-Western relationship, but Turkish-European relationship, will not be resolved. I mean, the framework questions will not be resolved, irrespective of who wins the elections. And some of the thorny questions, again, the Eastern Mediterranean one, I don't think that it will be resolved, but it can be better managed. It can be managed with a different discourse, with different styles. But I don't anticipate these to be resolved anytime soon, and probably there will be more element of continuity in terms of the content of the policy between the current government and an opposition-led government when it comes to Eastern Mediterranean, when it comes to Cyprus, Greece, etc. But those disputes and discontents can be better managed. And one final thing, I think Ukraine shows something that I think Europeans are still unwilling to grasp. when it comes to Russian-Western confrontation, Black Sea is a major area of confrontation. But so is the Eastern Mediterranean. Russia has never had that much presence in Mediterranean. Russia is an actor in Syria. Russia is an actor in Libya. Russia is a major partner of Algeria. Russia has a presence in Eastern Mediterranean. And when it comes to confrontation with the West, the Black Sea and Eastern Mediterranean are not seen as a two separate space in Russian-Western confrontation. Rather, the Russia sees this as an integrated space, whereas the Europe still seems to, see this as two separate space. And in both places, Turkey is a major player. So any sensible policy in Turkey and in Europe, in the West, will necessitate a better conversation between them, because this is a security question for both. But unfortunately, right now, politics is preventing a sensible geopolitical cooperation between the both sides.
Well, time is over. Thank you so much for your participation, and thank you all for your attention.